The email arrived at 11:47 p.m., glowing cold against the dark walls of Daniel Mercer's office. He almost ignored it. The board rarely sent messages that late unless something was urgent. He clicked it open with mild curiosity, expecting numbers, projections, maybe a change in scheduling. Instead, he found a decision, a vote. Effective immediately, he was removed as CEO of the company he had built from nothing. The words were formal, polished, and sharp. At the bottom sat a familiar name, Adrian Cole, his best friend, his partner, his brother in everything but blood. For a moment, Daniel did not breathe. The city lights outside the glass windows shimmered below, alive and restless, unaware that his world had just shifted. He read the email again, slower this time. There was no apology, no hint of doubt, just phrases like strategic realignment and leadership transition. His position would be replaced at sunrise. Security access would change. Public announcement at 9. He leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked softly. His mind began searching for logic, for some mistake, some misunderstanding. He had met Adrian only hours ago. They had reviewed quarterly reports together. Adrian had smiled, even joked about grabbing coffee after the meeting. There had been no warning, no tension in his voice. Daniel stood abruptly, the chair rolling back. He paced the length of the office. 20 years of work filled that room. The framed photo of their first tiny office. The award from their first industry recognition. Whiteboard still covered in his handwriting, mapping out next year's expansion plan. He touched the board lightly, as if it might vanish. He remembered the beginning clearly. 2 young men with more ideas than money, renting a cramped workspace above a bakery. The smell of bread used to drift through their window every morning. They had laughed through stress, shared meals they could barely afford, promised each other that success would never change them. Loyalty had been their foundation, and now loyalty felt like a story from another life. His phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. "We need to talk tomorrow. I hope you understand." Understand what? Daniel did not reply. He stared at the message until the screen dimmed. His chest felt tight, not from anger yet, but from confusion. He replayed the last year in his head. He had pushed for expansion into new markets. Adrian had advised caution. Investors had shown concern about risks. There had been debates, yes, but debates were normal. They always resolved them together. Unless those debates were never resolved at all. Daniel grabbed his coat and left the office without turning off the lights. The elevator ride down felt endless. Each floor that passed was another reminder that he might never walk those halls as CEO again. Employees trusted him. They believed in his vision. What would they think tomorrow when they read the announcement? Outside, cold air struck his face. It cleared some of the fog in his mind, but sharpened the sting. He walked instead of calling a driver. The streets were quieter at that hour. Traffic lights blinked yellow over empty intersections. He walked fast, as if movement could outrun betrayal. At home, he tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter and opened his laptop again, hoping the email would disappear. It didn't. Instead, news alerts had already begun drafting stories. Someone had leaked the information early. Headlines formed in neutral tones that hid the drama behind business language. Founder steps down. Steps down, the lie of it burned. He poured a glass of water but didn't drink it. His thoughts were racing too fast. Adrian would have needed votes from at least 3 board members. That meant conversations, persuasion, planning. It meant weeks, maybe months of preparation, all behind his back. The realization settled heavily. This was not a sudden decision. It was a carefully built move. Adrian had smiled at him while gathering support, had nodded at his presentations while convincing others he was too reckless. Daniel sat at the kitchen table and let the truth form fully in his mind. He had been outmaneuvered not by a rival, by his closest friend. He thought about calling him, demanding answers immediately. But something stopped him. Pride, maybe. or fear of hearing confirmation in Adrian's calm voice. Daniel knew that once Adrian explained, the betrayal would feel final. Right now, there was still a thin thread of disbelief holding him upright. He moved to the living room and stared at the shelf filled with old photos. There was one from their first product launch. Adrian had thrown his arm around Daniel's shoulders, both of them laughing like they had already won the world. Daniel picked up the frame and studied Adrian's face. It looked open, honest, full of trust. Why? He whispered into the empty room. Sleep did not come that night. He lay in bed, eyes open, replaying every sign he might have missed. Adrian grown distant. Had he seemed impatient? Daniel remembered moments when Adrian had insisted on reviewing documents alone before board meetings. At the time, it seemed responsible. Now it felt calculated. At 6:30 a.m., his phone began buzzing again. Messages from colleagues, some shocked, some cautious. A few carefully worded, as if unsure which side would remain powerful. The official announcement was live. Daniel, read it. It praised his visionary leadership while explaining that the company required stability during a critical growth phase. Adrian was quoted expressing gratitude and commitment to the company's future. The words felt polished and distant, like a speech written for strangers. By 9, news channels were discussing the change. Analysts debated whether the founder had become too ambitious. Daniel watched silently, absorbing how quickly narratives formed without him. He showered, dressed, and drove back to the office anyway. His access card still worked. For now, employees avoided his eyes at first, unsure how to approach him. Some offered quiet support, others kept their distance. He walked into his office and began packing slowly. Each item into a box felt like closing a chapter. The plant by the window, the notebooks filled with early sketches, the small coffee mug Adrian had given him years ago with the words "built together" printed on it. He held that mug longer than the others. A knock came at the door. Adrian stepped in. He looked composed, dressed sharply as always, but his eyes carried tension. For a second, neither spoke. The air felt heavy, charged with unsaid words. "You saw the announcement," Adrian began. Daniel set the mug down carefully. "I saw the email first." Adrian nodded once. "It wasn't easy." "It looked easy," Daniel replied, voice steady. Adrian stepped closer. The board was nervous. The expansion plans were risky. Investors threatened to pull funding, so you removed me, protected the company. The phrase hit harder in person. Daniel searched Adrian's face for guilt, for regret. There was something there, but it was buried under conviction. "You could have talked to me," Daniel said. "I tried," Adrian answered quickly. "You wouldn't slow down." The accusations stung. Daniel had pushed hard. Yes, he believed growth required bold moves. But he had always thought Adrian stood beside him, even in disagreement. This was never about slowing down. Daniel said quietly, it was about control. Adrian's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." Daniel almost laughed at the irony. Fairness had disappeared the moment that vote was taken in secret. Was it unanimous? Daniel asked. "Majority," Adrian replied, which meant Adrian had persuaded them. The silence stretched again. Years of partnership reduced to formal conversation. "I didn't want it to happen like this," Adrian said at last. But it did. Adrian seemed ready to say more, then stopped. Maybe there were explanations. Maybe fears Daniel never saw. But none of them erased the fact that trust had been broken. "I hope someday you'll see why I did it," Adrian said. Daniel lifted one of the boxes. "I hope someday you'll see what it cost." He walked past Adrian without another word. Outside the building, reporters had gathered. Cameras flashed as he exited. Questions were thrown at him about conflict, about strategy, about his next move. Daniel paused briefly. "I'm proud of what we built," he said calmly. "I wish the company success." He offered nothing more. Inside, Anger was beginning to replace shock. Not explosive anger, but something sharper, focused, controlled. He had given everything to that company. He had trusted one person above all others, and that trust had been used against him, driving away. He felt something solid forming beneath the pain. He would not beg for his position back. He would not fade quietly into the background. Adrian believed he had protected the company. Perhaps he had, but Daniel believed he had been betrayed. And betrayal demanded response. The city passed by in blurred lines as a new clarity settled over him. He knew the company's structure better than anyone. He knew the clients who trusted him personally. He knew the project still in early stages. If Adrian wanted control, he could have it. But Daniel would not surrender his vision by the time he reached home. The shock had transformed into resolve. The hurt was still there, deep and raw, but it no longer paralyzed him, fueled him. He stood by the window, watching the skyline where his former office tower rose tall and distant. That building no longer belonged to him. But his ideas did. His experience did. His drive did. Adrian had made a calculated move. Now Daniel would make his own. The betrayal at 11:47 p.m. had ended one chapter, but it had also started another. And this time Daniel would not be caught unaware. Daniel did not explode after the betrayal. He became quiet, focused, controlled. The shock had burned away, leaving something colder behind. Every morning he awoke before sunrise, sat at his desk at home and studied documents he had saved over the years, financial reports, client lists, contract timelines. He knew where the company was strong. He also knew where it was fragile. Expansion deals were half signed. Cash flow depended on two major clients. Investors were confident, but only if growth stayed steady. Adrian had removed him to protect stability. Daniel could shake that stability with a single move. He opened a blank notebook and wrote 3 words at the top: "Take back power." The plan formed quickly. He would start a new firm, smaller, faster, smarter. He would approach clients who trusted him personally. Many had worked with him from the beginning. They believed in his vision more than the brand name. If even a few moved with him, the old company would feel it. Stock would dip. The board would question Adrian. Pressure would build. It sounded simple, but nothing about it felt simple. At night, when the house was silent, doubt slipped in. He would stare at the ceiling and replay his last conversation with Adrian. "I protected the company." The words echoed. Was it possible Adrian truly believed that? Daniel hated the thought because it made the betrayal less clear. If Adrian acted out of fear, not greed, then revenge became less clean, less justified. Still, the memory of that email hardened him again. He began making calls, quiet ones, trusted contacts first. He met them in private offices and quiet cafes. He spoke calmly, confidently. He shared his new vision line operations, bold ideas without board interference. Some listened with excitement, some hesitated. All asked the same question: "Will this hurt your old company?" Daniel never answered directly. "I'm building something better," he would say. But inside, he knew the truth. This was not just about building. It was about proving. One evening, after a long day of meetings, his sister Emily stopped by. She studied him carefully as he poured coffee he did not need. "You look different," she said. "I'm fine." "You're sharp," she continued. "Like you're always ready for a fight." He forced a small smile. "Maybe I am." She sat across from him. "Is this about success, or is this about Adrian?" He didn't respond right away. The silence answered for him. Emily leaned forward. "If you destroy him, what do you win? Respect?" Daniel said quickly. "Or fear?" She asked that question stayed with him long after she left. Days passed. The paperwork for his new company was complete. Investors who believed in him personally agreed to fund the launch. A marketing team prepared announcements. Contracts waited for signatures. All that remained was timing. If he moved before the next quarterly report, the impact would be stronger. He visited the old office building once, standing across the street where no one noticed him. Lights glowed on the upper floors. Somewhere inside, Adrian was likely reviewing numbers, planning the future Daniel once imagined for himself. For a second, Daniel felt the old loyalty rise, a reflex built over decades. Then he remembered how easily Adrian had cut him out. Back at home, he opened the folder containing the transfer agreements. One signature from him would trigger a chain reaction. Emails would go out. Clients would shift. Markets would respond. Adrian would wake up to the same shock Daniel had felt at 11:47. P.M. The thought brought a flicker of satisfaction. That flicker scared him. He tried to justify it. This was business. Competition was normal. The company was strong, it would survive. If it wasn't, that wasn't his fault. Yet deep down, he knew motivation mattered. He wasn't just chasing opportunity, he was chasing balance. Pain. Meanwhile, Adrian felt pressure building without knowing why. Clients delayed renewals. Investors asked more questions. Rumors spread that Daniel was planning something big. Adrian dismissed them publicly, but privately he reviewed projections. Late into the night, he told himself he had made the right decision. Daniel had been too aggressive. The company needed calm leadership. Still, he could not ignore the tension tightening around him. Two men, two versions of justice. Daniel's launch date was set for Monday morning, Sunday night. He sat alone in his office at home, pen in hand. Rain tapped against the windows. The room felt smaller than usual. He imagined headlines announcing his new venture. He imagined Adrian's expression when the first client withdrew. Victory would taste sharp and immediate. But what came after? Would he feel stronger or simply emptier? He closed his eyes and pictured the early days again, the bakery office, the shared dreams, the promise of loyalty. Revenge would not bring that back. It would only confirm that trust had truly died. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it. "Can we talk before tomorrow, Adrian?" Daniel stared at the screen. For weeks, he had prepared for confrontation. Now it was here, sooner than expected. He looked down at the unsigned contracts. The pen rested between his fingers. Heavy. Revenge was no longer an idea. It was a choice. And by sunrise, he would have to decide who he wanted to become. Daniel did not reply to the message right away. He let it sit on his screen while the rain kept tapping against the window. Midnight was close. In a few hours, his new company would go public. Contracts would activate. Clients would move. The market would react. Adrian would feel the same shock Daniel had felt weeks ago. That had been the plan. Clean, precise. Final. The phone buzzed again. "Please, before morning." Daniel stared at the unsigned contracts spread across his desk. He had built everything carefully. Investors were ready. Staff were hired quietly. Marketing campaigns were scheduled to release at 8 a.m. All he had to do was send one confirmation email. Instead, he grabbed his coat. They met at the old office building. Not inside, outside, under the dim light near the entrance. The city was quiet at that hour. Adrian stood waiting, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. He looked tired, not powerful. For a moment, neither spoke. "I know what you're planning," Adrian said. Finally. Daniel did not deny it. "You should. I deserve that," Adrian replied, nodding once. "But I need you to understand something." Daniel crossed his arms. "I understood the email." Adrian flinched at that. "The board was ready to replace you months ago. They thought you were moving too fast. Okay? I convinced them to keep you longer by planning my removal." Daniel shot back. "I tried to protect you from a worse outcome," Adrian said. "If investors had pulled out suddenly, everything would have collapsed. Jobs, projects, years of work. I chose what I thought would hurt less. Daniel's jaw tightened. You chose without me. Yes, Adrian admitted, and that's on me. The honesty caught Daniel off guard. He had expected defense, excuses, blame. Not this, Adrian continued, voice lower now. I was afraid that if I told you how serious it was, you would push harder just to prove them wrong. You've always fought. That's what makes you great. But it also scared them. You, Daniel asked. Adrian looked at the building behind them. Scared me too. The words hung in the air. Daniel felt anger rise again, but it wasn't as sharp as before. It was tangled with something else, disappointment, maybe even regret. So you decided I was the problem. I decided to save what we built, Adrian said. At least that's what I told myself. Silence followed. Cars passed in the distance. The city kept moving, unaware of the battle unfolding in the dark. Daniel thought about the contracts waiting at home. If he moved forward, Adrian would face immediate pressure. The board would question his leadership. Investors would panic. It would be swift and public. You think I won't do it? Daniel said. Adrian shook his head. No, I think you can. That's why I'm here. I know you well enough to know you've prepared something strong. Daniel stepped closer. You ended 20 years of trust with one vote. I know. And you want mercy? I want honesty, Adrian replied. If you're going to hit us, look me in the eye and tell me it's not personal. Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped. He wanted to say it was business, strategy, fair competition. But the truth pressed against his chest. It is personal. He said quietly. Adrian nodded slowly, as if he had expected that. I was angry, Daniel continued. I still am. If you didn't just remove me, you made me look unstable, reckless. I never meant to attack your character. But that's what happened. Adrian looked down for a moment. I should have talked to you first. I should have trusted you enough to fight it out together. I failed there. The word failed echoed in Daniel's mind. Adrian rarely admitted weakness. Daniel felt the weight of his decision settle fully. Now, revenge had seemed powerful in isolation, but standing face to face, seeing the strain in Adrian's eyes, it felt different, less heroic, more destructive. If I launch tomorrow, Daniel said, your stock drops. The board blames you. You might lose your position too. I know, and you're still here. Yes, why? Because I'd rather lose my job than lose every chance of fixing this. Adrian said. The simplicity of that answer cut through Daniel's anger. For weeks. Daniel had imagined this moment differently. He had imagined cold satisfaction, not this messy mix of emotions. He had wanted Adrian to feel helpless. Now he saw something else. Fear, regret, responsibility. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A scheduled email sat. Ready to send, one tap. He looked at Adrian. If I stop this, nothing goes back to how it was. I don't expect it to, Adrian said. We won't be partners. I understand. Daniel exhaled slowly. The rain had stopped. The night felt still. He deleted the scheduled email. The screen went blank. Adrian watched him carefully. Thank you. This isn't forgiveness, Daniel said. It's a choice. I know. I'll build my own company, Daniel continued. But not to destroy yours. If I succeed, it'll be on my terms. Adrian gave a small nod. That's fair. They stood there for a moment longer. Two men who had built something great and nearly destroyed it through silence. There was no handshake, no dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet understanding that the past could not be undone. Daniel turned to leave, then paused. Next time you're afraid, he said without looking back, talk to me. I will. Adrian replied. Daniel walked away feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The anger had not vanished completely, but it no longer controlled him. He had come close to answering betrayal with destruction. Instead, he chose distance without damage. The next morning, there were no explosive headlines, no sudden market crash. Instead, weeks later, news broke of Daniel's new venture launching independently. It grew steadily, built on fresh ideas. Rather than old grudges, Adrian kept his position. The company stabilized. They competed at times, but fairly. Late one evening, Daniel reflected on how near he had come to crossing a line he could not uncross. Revenge had promised relief, but it would have chained him to the past. Letting go did not erase the betrayal, simply stopped it from shaping his future. He understood now that revenge feels powerful in the moment of decision, but real strength lies in choosing who you want to become after the hurt, and that choice once made changes everything.